not a lot that we need to do here, so I'm going to play relatively passive. Watch out for the Kraken. Kraken's going this way, so I'm going to go someplace else. And look at that, the Kraken didn't impact me at all. If that was a crab tank, I could not have, just circumnavigated it like that, because it would be holding down a wider area. But Kraken went out, I looked at where it was going, I went someplace else, I attacked their teammates. Kraken can do absolutely nothing to stop me from doing that. Oh my gosh, have I been getting a lot of pushback about Kraken lately. Ever since that tweet showing how it can fight other specials went out and people learned to hop on tower or give power clam jumps, there have been so many opinions expressed that this special is broken, worse than missiles, needs to be removed from the game or banned from tournaments, and no. If that were the case, it would be replacing Crab Tank on top level comps. It's not. It's being paired with the Crab sometimes and finding success that way, but Crab is still the best special in the game. Kraken is being played because it works well with Crab, not because it's better than Crab. But Gem, how can Crab be better when there's so much counterplay? You can headshot the rider, or flank the rider, or shred the tank. You can't do any of that to a Kraken. There's no counterplay. Wrong. What you're talking about as counterplay right now isn't counterplay, it's a way to splat the user of the special. That's a narrower set of things we're talking about. Yes, you can't splat the rider with a Kraken, but splatting players is not the objective of any game mode that has ever been in a Splatoon game. This game does not have a deathmatch mode. You can succeed in this game while splatting your opponents fewer times than they splat you. As I've illustrated many times in numerous videos of mine at this point, the way you win games of Splatoon is by controlling the space you need in order to keep your objective players safe while they play the objective. If you can effectively keep the enemy team out of your zone of control, that is, the area where if your opponent enters, they're immediately being threatened, then you have a valuable weapon to your team. That's a weapon that can keep the opponents away from your Tower Rider, or Rainmaker Carrier, or Power Claim Holder, or Splat Zone Painter. It doesn't need to splat players quickly. That's certainly valuable, as removing someone from play means they can't approach the objective for the next 15 seconds or so, and you can score a lot of points in that time, but even if it doesn't splat anyone at all, if it can just play keep away, making it too dangerous for the opponents to even try and engage, that's just as good. That's what something like a sloshing machine does. Its time to splat is pretty bad, especially if it doesn't aim perfectly, but it's still a top tier because of how well it controls space. A 96 gal can two-shot any player that enters this whole area I just painted on the map. That's a pretty threatening weapon, especially if a wall to keep it where it's at. It's not a perfect main weapon by itself. Its aim RNG is weak, and its fire rate leaves a lot to be desired, and it has a hard time moving around while it's shooting especially, so it's easy to push into sometimes. Because of the fire rate, it's not fantastic at painting. Its sub-weapon doesn't do any of that for it. But if you enter this range against a 96 gal that's looking at you, you're immediately being shot at, and if 2 of those shots land, you're down. When that 96 gal pops Kraken, the zone it controls goes from this to this. Wait, you can't see it. Let me get out of the way so my squid icon isn't covering it up entirely. There. This is the range. Well, that's not right, Gem. It can dash. Okay, but the dash has a clear telegraphed windup that makes it dodgeable. It can also be jumped over. If you enter dash range around the Kraken, yes, you have to be careful, but you're not just immediately getting shot the way you are if you walk in range of a 96 gal. You can not know the Kraken is there until it starts charging and then still avoid the charge. It's not so easy if you just wander into an open sightline controlled by a ranged weapon. If you're building a fortress, that fortress needs to go all the way around what it's protecting. It doesn't make sense to take part of the wall, remove it, and use it to reinforce another part of the wall, leaving a gap. Sure, that part of the wall you reinforced is going to be harder to break, but you don't need to break it, because we left a hole somewhere else in the wall. The Kraken is invincible, but you're reducing the amount of space on the map that player is able to control by so much that you severely weaken the team's ability to control space in a conventional way. At some point, it seems like the Reddit hive mind at r/Saltoon got the idea that this special is game-breaking because nothing happens if they shoot at that reinforced section of the wall instead of exploiting the weakness it creates in other sections of the wall. r/Saltoon, by the way, is not a place to get your Splatoon opinions from. It is a place where angry people go. Being angry distorts your perception of reality. Because as we've discussed on this channel before, angry people don't learn, they blame. The most charitable argument that can be made for a subreddit like that to exist is that it is for venting. Here's the problem with that. Venting is something that you do with someone who is sympathetically listening to you. It can be positive and therapeutic, but that is not what's happening here. A vent channel loses its purpose as soon as there are people in that channel who aren't willing to support one another on a pretty intimate emotional level. What's happening here is closer to a garbage dump, a place where we put stinky things that we expect being dumped here won't be dumped in other places. But that's not even how that works either, because the act of going here creates more garbage. Its very existence encourages the production of more garbage and more pungent garbage than someone else made, so that it gets more attention, because people are rewarded with internet points for posting their anger in ways that resonate and trigger anger in other people. This is a bunch of people choosing to be in a negative atmosphere and complain together, and the negativity always leaks into other online spaces and other places in their lives. There is no plastic that is non-biodegradable enough to contain vibes that bad. And it's because of that we have this silly picture misleading people into thinking Kraken just works exactly the same way missiles do and that there's no counterplay to it. The counterplay to Kraken Royale is very simple. When someone uses it, go someplace else. That doesn't mean you don't get to play the game. That doesn't mean you have to go backward. That doesn't even mean you have to disengage from the enemy team a lot of the time. That's what makes it different from missiles. When missiles go off, they create a lethal zone around the landing point, and as they're landing, an enemy team with good awareness is sending 4 players at you who are attacking right as you're having to run away from them. With Kraken, you can't send 4 players to follow up on the Kraken, because one of the players has transformed into the Kraken. Since that player has such a short range and it takes time to close in on a target, if your team splits up enough that the Kraken can't target more than 1 player at a time, the Kraken is occupied, your 1 player they're chasing is occupied, and now for the rest of the team it's just a 3v3. Missiles turns a 4v4 into a 4.5v4, but Kraken just makes it a 3v3 and an awkward stall out of a 1v1. Kraken cannot force an entire team to move like missiles can. It cannot decisively nuke a whole zone on the map like Booyah or Tri-Strike. It can't trap anyone in place by both cutting off their escape route and attacking them at the same time. It can only make 1 player move at a time. Everyone else gets to go wherever they want and continue to fight the rest of its team to some degree. Also, that 1v1 the Kraken is opting for, chasing that 1 player of yours around, sure, they're not going to be able to fight back now, but if they move well and don't get splatted, the Kraken is going to have to transform back, and when it does, it's stuck for about a second in the transformation animation. Not invincible anymore, but not actionable either. This is a free splat. Just watch for when it's flashing red, wait for it to stop, and then if you get in range, it's the Kraken user that actually has no counterplay at that point. Their counterplay here is not to be in range when you get on top of them, which means that they need to get away from you before their special runs out. This effectively decreases the uptime of the special. You're free to start moving back into the game while they run off to a phone booth to change out of their superhero costume. As long as you're one of the players not being chased, just keep tabs on where the Kraken is, play defensively where you need to in case it switches targets to you, but if it's not on you, just keep playing the game, knowing that one of their players can't shoot you with a projectile weapon anymore. While there was a Kraken out, I flanked the entire enemy team, got behind the Rainmaker carrier, and splatted it, ending the game. The Kraken player wasn't stopping me from doing that. In fact, if it had been a 96 gal, it would have had a better chance of stopping me from doing that. Now, what a lot of people get upset about and consider unfair about this special is its ability to spam jump on tower to stay on against everything but a tri-strike, and its ability to give super jumps to power claim holders and clam blitz. These are cheese strats, gimmicks. If you're hopping around on tower for 7 seconds, that might give your team the push they need to clear a checkpoint. But with one player during that push just hopping up and down on tower, firing no shots, putting down no paint, this is the perfect time to attack the rest of their team. Yeah, maybe they do cheese that checkpoint. Booyah Bomb is worse. You can reliably Booyah Bomb the tower if you have lead in overtime and get someone on tower to end the game. The only counterplay there is to splat the player with the Booyah Bomb before they can throw it. It's too easy. I don't see people complaining about the GG Booyah, but frankly, I think that degenerates the tower control game plan more than this does. Even if you're up against a team that doesn't have a tri-strike weapon, 7 seconds of free tower riding isn't going to win you games of Splatoon by itself, especially if during those 7 seconds you're letting the enemy team walk right up to the tower to wait for your 7 seconds to be up so they can stop you the instant you transform back. As I've been making videos about since Splatoon 2, Power Clam super jump strats are straight up throwing if that's your primary game plan at top level. There are occasional instances where it can work, but for a lot of A or S rank players, they'll pick a brush just to roll behind enemy lines and give power clam jumps at the enemy basket all game. And that strategy does not work if teams play defense effectively. Getting that brush player in the first place depends heavily on the opponents not being able to hit shots on them as they approach the basket. A lot of the time, they're not even trying to hide to sneak by the enemy team, they're just running past them and hoping they miss. At a certain level of skill, they won't miss. That's not the only problem, though. After all, if that were the only problem, Kraken would solve it by being invincible. Super jumping the clam is very visible if you're paying attention to the power clam icon rising into the air. If you have to super jump the clam in instead of walking it in, that means the enemy team has at least some kind of control of their basket, so there's little chance you're going to be able to do more than put in whatever clams you brought with you before you're getting collapsed on by the entire enemy team with no paint to work with, and without any peripheral vision of them because you're looking up at the basket. It's also not always safe to assume that the jumper doesn't get splatted by a bomb on their landing, which can stop the clam from going in at all. But let's say they do score. Typically, this play results in 20 to 26 points being scored, 2 players being splatted, and the enemy team getting a pity clam. If this wasn't the first score for that team, at minimum 10 of those points went into burning through a penalty instead of scoring. So what you've done is given the enemy team a strong chance to push and a free 20 extra points to push with, in exchange for, at best, 16 more points on your score. 95% of the time, unless that power clam will win you the game on the spot in overtime, it's actually counterproductive against players with competitive experience. Far from breaking the game, at high levels, this will actually be frustrating because of people on your team attempting it, not players on the other team beating you with it. Now, I don't want to sound like I'm coming down too hard on Kraken here, because I do think it's strong. Top teams are definitely considering it. For example, just yesterday at Squid Junction, we saw a team called New Meta using Kraken as an entry tool to allow them to run Tetras and Brush, charging a player with the Kraken to start a fight and then trapping them between the Kraken and the highly mobile Tetras and Brush to open up fights with a numbers advantage. It's a great special to send into areas where sharks are likely to be hiding and clear them out, basically playing Minesweeper so the rest of the team knows it's safe to step forward and take more space. Also on 96 Gal, the splash wall gives the Kraken user the ability to keep some of the space they've secured by using the Kraken in the forward position. They still have to retreat a little before the Kraken ends to keep their transformation from being camped, but they don't have to retreat nearly as much as they would have to otherwise. I would like to see the devs add more knockback, so you stand any chance of knocking it off tower or taming it with your main weapon. It's just that the nuance in this conversation gets drowned out when there are so many people jamming into the conversation with "there's no counterplay," or that it needs to be banned or something. It's not the best special in the game. We still saw games with 4 or 5 crab tanks yesterday. That special isn't gone. New Meta's performance with a comp centered around that Kraken was impressive, and should at least serve as an inspiration to other teams to consider how comfortable they are on the weapons they play, in addition to considering how strong a weapon is considered at that time. But they also got shut down pretty decisively by Crush Soda. Want to see Kraken counterplay? Go look at how Kyo and company were taking it out of the game. If you don't think it's beatable, you are not problem solving. And if you're not problem solving, you're not going to learn how to win more games of Splatoon. I don't like that I keep having to side against the Kraken in discussions, because I don't want to discourage people from playing it. But when people are raging about it, and that negative perception of it is going to trickle down to other people, I feel that it's important to combat that negativity by explaining, no, there is counterplay. It is beatable, to the point where I think people will probably believe I think less of the Kraken than I actually do. I think more of this special than FLC does, which is a brave thing to admit because FLC is the analyst who taught the West how to play this video game. It's largely his work that our community's understanding of weapon roles derives from. He called InkVac falling out of favor in competitive Splatoon before anyone else did, and he has this to say about Kraken. Kraken isn't quite InkVac levels of game losing, but not having your main weapon, or a crab, for extended periods really sucks in this game. Yeah, you can do cheesy things with it, but it often just ruins your front line. Don't get me wrong, it has a lot of game-winning moments too, unlike Vac, but especially on a weapon like 96, it's so easy to exploit the sudden lack of crossfire when it's activated. The analysts of this game don't all agree on exactly where Kraken is at, which, to be clear, is a healthy thing. It means we're less likely to get blindsided by strategies we hadn't considered, because more strategies are being considered. If our scene worked in such a way that one person declared, "This is broken, this is terrible," and no one questioned it, we'd never see it coming when someone suddenly started running the terrible thing and beating the broken thing. But I'm not seeing that kind of nuance in the more casual discourse around this special, and that usually leads to a negative public perception of the game that's unwarranted and isn't even based in reality. Consider the opinions of players who know better than you and learn what you can from them, but also do some problem-solving and theory crafting of your own. Find your own way to deal with Kraken that I haven't even mentioned in this video. At the very least, stop getting your Splatoon opinions from r/Saltoon. That, at least, is something I know we can all benefit from.